Thank you, Katie, very much for that inspirational story. We are delighted to welcome to the stage next Ms. Leslie Smith. Leslie is a mixed martial artist who is literally fighting for professional fighters. She leads an organization called Project Spearhead, an effort to unionize professional fighters. Her story is also in your program, but here she is. She's going to tell it to us right now.
Thank you, Christian. Thank you, Thea, and all of EPI for having me. And thank you, Katie, for that amazing story. When I was first asked to speak at this event, my attorney, Lucas Middlebrook, asked if I had spoken to this many people before. And I asked him if throwing a tantrum in front of 45,000 people when one of my fights got stopped earlier counted. Because I did that. As you might already know, I'm a professional mixed martial arts fighter. I fight in a cage for a living. Up until April of this year, I was a fighter employed but misclassified as an independent contractor with the Ultimate Fighting Championship, the UFC. It's the largest MMA company in the world. Before I was fired, I was on a 3-fight win streak at 135 pounds, ranked 9th in the world, had recently been recognized for exceptional fighting skills by my former employer with an award called Fight of the Night, and I had won my last fight by technical knockout using elbows. I was excelling in my fight career until the UFC abruptly ended it because I spoke up in favor of unionizing and started my own unionizing drive. In February of this year, I launched and was the interim president of a grassroots union organizing drive in the UFC called Project Spearhead. Project Spearhead began to collect authorization cards from active UFC fighters, and we were on track to submit the cards, the minimum amount of cards, and file with the NLRB for an election. We were gaining momentum and had gotten further than any other organizing drive had gotten, and one of the champions had publicly endorsed Project Spearhead. At the same time as I was launching the organizing drive, I was preparing for a fight. It was scheduled for April 21st in Atlantic City, New Jersey. Yeah. Where the New Jersey State Athletic Commission requires fighters and promoters to sign state-regulated bout agreements. I, my opponent, and the UFC all signed the bout agreement, and the agreement included a clause that said if I made weight, was cleared by the commission, and willing to compete, but the fight failed to materialize, then I'd be paid the full amount set forth in the agreement. I made weight and fulfilled my obligations, but my opponent did not. She failed to make weight, and it activated the clause. Within hours, the UFC elected to pay me not to fight. The UFC also informed me that they would consider the payout to count as the last fight on my promotional agreement, and they cut me from the roster. They wanted to pay me to get rid of me, but it's not that easy to get rid of me. Thanks. In response, I filed unfair labor charges with Region 4 of the NLRB in Philadelphia. My charge alleged that I had been retaliated against for engaging in protected union activity and that the UFC improperly classified us as independent contractors. About 2 months later, I was informed that Region 4 had found my charges to have merit. Yes. We had won a battle and now had the high ground. It was awesome. But that was very short-lived. Less than 12 hours later, I was advised that the NLRB Division of Advice and General Counsel's Office in DC had demanded the matter be taken from Region 4 and sent to their offices in DC. A meeting was held. I was not allowed to come. Less than 3 days after my attorney went to that meeting with the DC NLRB, the president of the UFC, Dana White, shared pictures of himself and President Trump and a UFC belt in the Oval Office. and told media that he had had a 3-hour dinner meeting with President Trump. Their relationship is strong. Dana spoke at the RNC on the president's behalf, and currently a documentary is being produced by the UFC to highlight their friendship and business deals of the past. The General Counsel and Division of Advice instructed Region 4 to dismiss my case based on their finding that the UFC did not retaliate against me. And because I was not retaliated against, they had no need to address the misclassification of fighters as independent contractors. It was the ideal result for the UFC, and the dismissal letter read like it had been written by the UFC. My attorney filed an appeal, and I submitted a sworn statement correcting multiple factual misstatements contained in DC's dismissal. But the appeal will go right back to Peter Robb, who has refused to recuse himself from the appeal despite our request that he do so. So even though the fighters are scared and don't understand what a union could do for them, I am still working on educating the fighters and collecting authorization cards for Project Spearhead, because the fighters need a union. They do. Thank you. I am still training daily because even though I don't have a promotion, it's what I do. I'm a fighter, and I'm just gonna keep on doing this. Thanks. I'm eager to learn what I can do to alleviate the fears of the fighters in the wake of the NLRB failing to protect my right to unionize. I'm dedicated to doing everything I can to educate the fighters and the public in general on the need to bargain collectively and stand up for our rights as workers, because nobody should have to sacrifice their dignity by pleading for basic workers' rights and begging their boss to share the revenue their labor generated, which is exactly what's happening right now. Thank you to everyone in this room for all the work you've already done to support labor's cause and for inviting me here to share my story. I welcome all information, advice, and help that I can get, and look forward to a future where we can all succeed without exploitation. Thank you.